Good morning. Our first speaker this morning, can you hear me? Good morning. Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Rudy Schild. He's an astrophysicist, a very brilliant astrophysicist from the Harvard-Smithsonian Centre for Astrophysics. His main research centers around black holes and dark energy. Albeit it sounds very complicated, Dr. Schild's skill is really to make it in plain English for people like you and I to understand. He also wants to bridge the gap, or give his idea to bridge the gap between the UFO community and the academic community, and how he feels that the two are butting heads right now. So please let me welcome to the stage Dr. Rudy Schild.
Thank you, John. So, good morning, and thank you all for coming, leaving your breakfast table, your coffee, and listening to these remarks, which I especially look forward to presenting to you because we live at such a fascinating time in the history of our civilization. I'm sure you all recall how science and religion kind of split up around the 1500s, and science went one way, religion the other way. But you know, these new topics of dark energy and dark matter are bringing science in from one side, and now the study of dark energy and study of New Age phenomena, UFOs and the like, are bringing what you call New Age or advanced thinking together from another side, and this is such a fascinating time. I hope that you can share with me the excitement of it. I know from remarks I've heard among you during the last days that there's a great deal of frustration by the fact that science seems to be so slow in getting started. Things that are so obvious to you from having researched for so long, scientists having given you such a bad time about, well, I know more than you do, so what you're doing is of no consequence whatsoever. I don't subscribe to that attitude personally, but I know you're frustrated with seeing it all too evidently. Now, my own approach is, and the agenda for this morning, is try to tell you what science is actually saying these days, to try to bring you up to speed with what we're actually saying in the ivory towers. And I think that you know I come from as high an ivory tower as it gets in this country. My work has been on black holes. It's published as scientific research in peer-reviewed journals, the Astronomical Journal, and so on. And I come before you because I see this interesting convergence of science with New Age topics. And so I'd like to begin the topic with something that you probably have some gleaning of and already know something about, and that's the issue of planets. Many of you have seen how in the last 10 years, science from astronomical observations with large telescopes has come to be assured that really planets exist all over in the universe. And more specifically, I think many of you realize that when we do really precise measurements of a distant star, we often see that with as high technology as we can bring to the matter, we can see, oh, look, the star is moving back and forth slightly. That must mean that the star is being orbited by a planet, and therefore we see direct evidence for planets. Right now, such planets have been evidenced in about 200 nearby stars, and what we've come to understand is, as carefully as we can make measurements today, we're gradually finding that basically all stars have at least one planet, and when you have one planet, it takes a lot of more patient study to find the rest of them. Now, this is really big. I mean, we now have come to understand that the universe really has planets everywhere, and it would take an extraordinary act of religious fervor to believe that life exists only on Earth. And what I'd like to say now is some more perspectives that come from the university community that add even a new perspective on how many planets, how many habitable planets there must be in the universe, because we've come to understand that our solar system is really full in a sense of the physics of the solar system. People have done computer simulations of our solar system and shown that if I imagine putting another planet in the solar system, so for example, at twice the distance of Mercury and giving it the right forward motion to be orbital in a computer simulation, in a relatively short time, mutual gravitational effects of all the planets working on that hypothetical planet will kick it out of the solar system. That means that our solar system is basically full. You couldn't put another planet in there. And if our solar system is full, and since our solar system is a very typical one, we think it was formed the way all the other solar systems are formed, we think that probably all stars actually have a full system of planets the way our solar system does. Now, think about our solar system from this point of view for a moment. Remember, you have the sun, and then Mercury is way too hot, Venus is a little bit too hot, Earth is just right, Mars probably had a bigger atmosphere in the past and therefore was warmer. Now it's a little bit too cold, and Jupiter and all the rest are way too cold. Too cold for water to exist at the surfaces, where water is the abundance of life. Water has this incredible solubility that can bring so many things together and help create life. And so we take the point of view that almost certainly every star in the sky probably has one habitable planet on the average. Now, that's big. Now, it's even more interesting than I've said so far, because many of you would have read in Scientific American and similar sources that in addition, we know about dark matter today. And I want to just remind you, the argument for dark matter is that when we look at a distant galaxy of stars, this giant spinning pinwheel, we notice that if we add up all the mass corresponding to all the light of all the stars and planets and nebulae in that galaxy, we know that that galaxy would fly apart from its rotational motion unless there's more matter that we can't see. And indeed, the unseen matter, the dark matter, has to exceed the visible matter by about 10 to 1. I'm talking here for the moment about ordinary dark matter, meaning protons, electrons, neutrons, carbon atoms, the stuff I'm made with, the stuff of this podium, the stuff that you're familiar with. This dark matter mystery has been around for a while, and I want to show you how we've come to understand that, amazingly, the dark matter consists of a giant network of planet mass objects formed in the primeval universe at a time that was come to understand by the hydrodynamics community centered at the University of California in San Diego, Professor Carl Gibson there, at the earliest ages of the universe. And so for my first slide, please, can I show you a picture of dark matter? So if we could have the first picture, please. I will show you a photograph made with a Hubble Space Telescope of a certain region in the nearest planetary nebula, which is useful to look at because here's the rare case where the universe shows you a lighted background, so any dark matter would look dark against this lit background. Could we have the first picture, please? It's on, okay. Behold, thank you. And on this image, taken with the Hubble Space Telescope, I want you to see and concentrate for the moment on a little object near the center, and it is one of these dark matter objects, or planetary mass objects, and they have been discussed as instabilities in the atmospheres of the nebula, but my colleagues say that that's not really what they are, that they have to have the mass of the sun, the mass of the Earth, a millionth of the mass of the sun, and now let's see, I went to the next slide. I'm trying to find that cursor here. If you see the cursor, tell me what corner of the screen it's on. There it is, here it is. I'm talking now about this object, and this is sometimes described in the astronomy literature as a cometary knot. This object has about the mass of our Earth, and it therefore is about a millionth the mass of our sun, and it is apparently the kind of dark matter object that our universe is made out of. In this planetary nebula, illuminated by the background, if you could see the whole nebula, you would see, now addressing this left side of the screen, you would see that the star that's illuminating this nebula would have to be on the upper right. The entire nebula is about as big as this entire wall, and the sunlight or the starlight shining on the nebula produces that cometary knot, that tail, extending away from the illuminating star. But then, as I told you, near the lower left on this illustration, and let me stop wasting time with the cursor. Can you see the pointer on the lower left side here? Okay, look at these three objects. They seem to be in a little bit of a cluster, and that makes them very difficult to detect from their gravitational signature, and in fact, this is why they weren't discovered in the past when the gravitational signature of these objects was first looked for. Then when you look around back over here, can you see there's a giant swarm of these objects? And again, when you try to discover this stuff from its gravitational signature, because in general you can't see it, it's dark matter, these swarms, and there are more swarms here and elsewhere in the nebula, these swarms make it virtually impossible to see this stuff by its gravitational signature. But fortunately, when we looked at distant quasars, it's much easier to detect, and it was therefore in the quasars, in study of their brightnesses, that we observed for the first time in 1996 the signature of the gravitational field of these dark matter particles, and from their effects, from their gravitational lensing effects, we were able to again establish that their mass is about the same mass as our Earth. Planetary mass, 1/1,000,000th of the mass of the Sun. As I say, the universe was made out of this dark matter originally. When stars were formed, these objects collected together to make our Sun and other stars. A number of them were left behind to orbit around the Sun, to form Kuiper belts, and to form Oort clouds, and various kinds of solar system objects that we observe. The net result is we see a universe with many stars dominated by their planets, and we now have a good picture of what the dark matter is, the ordinary dark matter is, and how it came to be. Now, again, going back to the issue of the university level response to what is the universe made out of, and ultimately, why do we see UFOs? You must know that the university community has gone to the idea that we're smart, we know how to propagate information about our presence here on Earth, we do it with radio waves. What could be more obvious than that? Well, you are telling me that actually you do it with telepathy, that it can't get more efficient than that. But on the other hand, the university crowd isn't prepared to go there. And so we have produced a SETI program that's been going on for probably 20 years now. It has produced the largest distributed computing system ever in the history of our civilization, and produced no evidence of life around other planets. Now, at the same time as the SETI program moves along, the university crowd has taken an important additional step that you'll want to hear about. Probably most of you don't know that last year, the American Astronomical Society, so that's the body of the 10,000 American professional astronomers, awarded its Carl Sagan Medal to David Grinspoon, who's at the planetarium here in Denver, and in the citation of the Carl Sagan Award specifically mentioned his exciting, enticing book, Lonely Planet. If you read Lonely Planet, you will immediately see that the first half of the book is about the Drake equation and the Search for Extraterrestrial Life program, the SETI program, but the second half of the book is about UFOs and abductions, quoting results of Dr. John Mack, and so on. Now, in the end, David Grinspoon says that, well, as a scientist, there still isn't compelling evidence for UFOs and abduction phenomena. And so as a scientist, he can't believe it. But reading the book, you can't fail to realize that he has researched this so carefully all his life that, of course, he really does want to believe it. Also, speaking to the point that it must seem to many of you that nothing is happening in these last 10 or 15 years, I want to say that I think that an enormous amount has happened, and one important step was taken recently by the Catholic Church. Are you all aware that figures from the Vatican have appeared on Rome TV on 6 occasions between the years, I think, 2002 and 2004? And described how the church is changing its position dramatically, and in fact, at this moment, is farther out than the science and university community? That the church does not find it difficult to believe that we are being visited by extraterrestrials, that people who report alien abductions are not possessed of demonic spirits, that today the Catholic Church is considering whether Christ's redemptive sacrifice is sufficient for all civilizations on all planets or only for our human population on Earth, and even that the second figure in the Trinity, Jesus Christ, might be actually a hybrid. This is phenomenal progress. Did you expect 10 years ago to ever hear this from the church? And I'd also like to say that the French government, now reasonably independent of the American government because they have their own security issues, has done their Feynman Commission, their Blue Ribbon Commission investigating UFO activities, and published their Comitas report. COMITAS is a report of their Blue Ribbon Committee consisting of their experts in image analysis and radar tape analysis and astrophysics and psychiatry and psychology and all of those traditional same fields. And their Blue Ribbon Committee has published on an official website, government website for the French government, a report that says, yes, there are UFOs. There are a handful of confirmed cases by their criterion of excited cockpit conversation confirmed by ground radar tapes and whatnot. So in fact, there is a great deal of movement on all fronts that are sort of converging to the same place that this audience is coming. And I think that you should congratulate yourselves to a large extent for doing careful research and bringing this subject forward to where it's accessible to governments, to university crowd, and to religious people and political leaders everywhere. Again, getting back to the response of the university committee. Oh, and by the way, I want to show you a picture of the dark matter. I'm sorry, I should perhaps have done this before. I'd like to bring this image up onto the screen, if I might. Here's a picture of what we now think the universe really looks like. Before I showed you the universe contained with one individual nebula, but now I'd like to show you, if I might, what we think you see when we look into deep space. There's an important application here. Again, my laser pointing is showing you one of these dark matter objects, which is presumed to be in our foreground. This is a artist simulation. It's not a direct photograph. But I want to tell you a few salient points here. One, these objects are everywhere. They're reasonably large when we see them, but also they're clumped in this way, which is, as I said before, what makes them so hard to detect from their gravitational signature. But also see these objects here and here and here and here and here. And actually, this is an image made to show what it would be like to travel to a distant quasar. An important point implied here is that space travel would be extremely encumbered by this population of objects. And it's a little bit surprising to me that NASA hasn't really taken more interest in this, because if we're going to leave our Earth and attempt to travel by rocket to a distant star, we're going to have to contend with these. It means that along the way we're going to have to map these objects However that's done, they're dark and difficult to detect. And remember, these objects, these dark matter objects, are not seen as planets near a star. These are objects that I would call rogue planets, just everywhere floating around the universe, but clumping together by their mutual self-gravity. That's a little bit of an aside. I want to now get back to the ideas of the university response to dark matter. And perhaps you know that the university response is to say, you know, these observations of UFOs, silent operation, visits from other stars, how can they do that in finite lifetimes? University response is to say, well, it really looks like the universe is built with some other dimension to it. And maybe it's interdimensional, and these things are being explored now with what's called string theory. And it started out going to, well, maybe there's not the 4 Einstein coordinates, the 3 spatial coordinates, and time coordinate that make up the Einstein set. Maybe there's a 5th dimension, but as they got into it, it looked like for this to work, there had to be more than 4-dimensional. Quickly, they were up at 11-dimensional, and then 12-dimensional and brain, and now 13-dimensional. And if you want to read about these topics, my Harvard colleague Lisa Randall has discussed them in a book that's meant to be accessible to you all. But quite honestly, it leaves me cold, and it's left a lot of other people like yourselves cold for the following reason. It doesn't really ever seem to address the things that excite you. It doesn't address the things that you really see. It doesn't really mention how UFOs get here. It doesn't really mention these other modern miracles that are surrounding us all the time and are in so many people's experience. By now, surely half of our population have some experience of one of these modern miracles. I mean miracles like biblical miracles, what are burning bushes and what are wheels in the sky, miracles of precognition or of past lives, or these other miracles of remote sensing. And remember that Russell Targ taught 200 physicists in the CIA to do remote viewing, and successfully. Other modern miracles of telepathic communication, miracles like near-death experiences, crop circles, and so on. All of these things don't seem to be addressed at all by string theory. But I mean to tell you in the next few minutes how they seem to be addressed by this new dark energy phenomenon that you're reading about in Scientific American. It was discovered with observations of supernovae, and the interpretation of it goes back to Edgar Mitchell and the idea of quantum holograms, which I'll now try to describe to you in the next 10 minutes. So this dark energy thing, and now if I could have my picture back, the view graph back, I'd like to show you that we're trying to describe to you what the universe looked like from the beginning of time until the present. And again, I'm hoping that you can see my laser pointer here. I want to now focus on the lower left-hand side of this plot, and that's the beginning of time, where now I'm showing time as increasing along this axis to the right, and the size of the universe is being shown here on this axis to the left. And as the size of the universe expands, what we mean by that is the distance between any two objects in the universe that aren't moving. I'm sorry? Thank you. Can we make the screen darker? Is that possible? Thank you. So what I'm trying to show with this is that at the beginning of time, the universe was small and it started to expand, and that was the initial inflationary event. And in that event, the black holes at the centers of galaxies were created. Following that earliest expansion, seen on the left side of the plot, the universe was on coast and started to slow up. Thank you. Good techies. the universe started to decelerate or slow down this expansion because of the mutual attraction of the self-gravity of all the mass contained in the universe. And it was early on debated, well, how far will this go? Will it expand, stop expanding, then come back together into a big crunch? That was thought possible 25 years ago, but it was decided against with the WMAP experiment of 16 years ago, when it was thought that, oh, the universe seems to be expanding and just slowing down at just the right rate that it will never stop expanding, but will never re-crunch either. It will just keep on slowly decelerating its expansion. However, this new observation of supernovae and the thing that we call dark energy has turned all of that on its head. And now we're discovering that the universe started its expansion and slowed down, but then as shown on this plot, showing more what's happening today, I show today as here. Notice we're in a phase of re-expansion. And the future history of our universe will be that the universe, after an initial expansion, coast, now re-expanding, will re-expand faster, 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 faster for infinity. We're bound for an infinite eternity, an ever faster expanding universe, filling up with this dark energy. This dark energy that we're now coming to terms with has an amazing property. It has the property of acting like a negative gravity. In other words, unlike gravity, which pulls everything together, this dark energy seems to be actually causing space to fall, to explode and act like a negative gravity and expand, actually. So in the literature, if you're reading the science journals, you'll see this explained as dark energy, as quintessence, as a 0 point of the vacuum field, as a scalar field solution of the Einstein-Maxwell field equations, or what I will talk about for the rest of this program, the information field. Because I will want to emphasize for the rest of this talk that it's really, in its most exciting aspect, a field which enables the flow of information with quantum holograms. Now, I'm not the first to think of this, and I think that the hero of this understanding is actually Edgar Mitchell, who in fact went back to an earlier theory, first discussed by Schempf, and Dr. Mitchell is, to me, the hero of our times and really ought to get the Nobel Prize. And I just overheard that he has been nominated, but this is still too strange for a Nobel Prize. Recall about Dr. Mitchell that he got his PhD from MIT in aeronautics, joined the Apollo astronaut corps, was the 6th man to step on the moon as an Apollo astronaut, but then had this amazing samadhi experience on the return trip from the moon. Remember, he calls that the barbecue mode. This is described in his book. And this samadhi experience was this experience of being ecstatic in the presence of the One and how all of the universe was one. And when he landed and was debriefed, he couldn't wait to tell NASA about it. But NASA rejected this, said, it's all in your mind, it's unimportant, and Edgar Mitchell, a scientist with integrity, split his relationship with NASA within 2 years and founded the Noetics Institute because he was aware that this is what we really need to study. And I'm telling you about it because this is what enables the antics of the spacecraft that you're all fascinated with. So let me not get ahead of myself. In describing the magical properties and how this is an information-driven universe, I have to now bring up the subject of wormholes. Probably you wouldn't know this, but a major astrophysicist at Caltech named Kip Thorne wrote a book for the lay audience, published in 1993 or 1994. It was called Einstein's Outrageous Legacy: Black Holes, Wormholes, Warps in Space of Time. And in it, he discusses wormholes in one chapter, and he makes this critical following observation, that if the universe has a field, and kind of energy field, with the property of negative gravity, then it can have wormholes. Now, what are wormholes? wormholes are warps in space and time where information can travel from one place in the universe to another without having to go the dimensional route, but rather can find a shortcut. And it means that transfer of information through the universe can exceed at far more than the speed of light. And remember, this is not a contradiction with the Einstein special theory of relativity, which posits that particles cannot move faster than the speed of light. But in this wormhole transfer, information travels, not particles. And this is the magic of quantum holograms, which I will hope to describe for you, because it's key to Dr. Mitchell's discovery and key to this wormhole, a transfer of information that's enabling these UFO technologies. And, by the way, is key to memory, existence of past lives, ghosts, fairies, sexual experience in humans, crop circles, and all of the other subjects that science hates to deal with. And guess what? You're the first to know, and science is going to have to just bumble along the best it can. Now, in dealing with these topics, I would like to tell you a little bit about the way these quantum holograms and this information field deals with the universe in a way that has until now been attributed to higher dimensions. And remember I said a few minutes ago, people have explored this higher dimensional idea with string theory, and they've pushed it to great limits. There must be a good 1,000 papers in the refereed literature about string theory, this and that, and yet we still don't see cosmic strings, and it doesn't seem to describe anything that's really of interest to this crowd and to other crowds, as I've already said. So what are these other mysterious dimensions in the universe that do enable it? And the thing that is key here is the fact that we now have identified this new information field, this dark energy field. It's solutions to the Einstein's equations, and it actually acts as another field that's like what we often call the vector field, which is that field in the universe where some gravitational effects seem to propagate, but light waves propagate, X-rays, radio waves, all that stuff. No, those are little oscillating signals in this vector field that we describe with the Einstein-Maxwell's equations. Now this information field is significantly different. It's rather more like the old ether that had been discovered 100 years ago. It supports a whole class of waves that are a little bit like sound waves, but not exactly. They're what we call quadrupole waves. And remember I said that a sound wave, that a light wave does these oscillations like you saw in your high school science text. The waves I'm talking about now are more quadrupole waves that have a funny oscillation that works kind of this way. But the entirety of space and time actually coordinate and focus these waves, and these waves actually exist in local oscillations here, which are actually supported by and in full interaction with larger tails of the waves all over the universe. It's rather a different kind of information wave, and it's a different kind of field in the universe, but that seems to be this alternate to other dimensions. We're told that the purpose of life in the universe is to increase its frequency of these waves, because as you increase the frequencies of these waves, and by the way, you and I receive these waves by our spinal column acting as a receiving antenna for both receiving and transmitting, and as in all antenna systems, the logic unit is in the brain at the top. And like in basically all antenna systems that we have manufactured on Earth, you have a local transmitting device, a logic device at the top, encoding and decoding Fourier transforms that then get transmitted and absorbed by the spinal column, and that puts us in what Edgar Mitchell calls phase conjugate resonance with these information waves in the universe, these dark energy waves, these information waves, and that's how the universe works. Now, these are called quantum holograms because they tend to contain one bit of information. And the way this works is that if you analyze what you're actually feeling from time to time, feelings of, I like the sunset, I feel cold, that's actually an experience. And that's actually transmitted by you to another individual with whom you might be in telepathic contact by transmission of one of these waves. It's a quantum wave of one information qubit. And I want to tell you that these waves are very difficult to deal with because they're in resonance with actual matter, but at a very quantum level. And what I'm going to tell you next is what God is in the universe of these quantum waves. Now, by God here, I mean capital G-O-D. And if you read some of, or listen to some of the symposiums that I gave last year at Ozarks or 2 years ago at Laughlin, Nevada, I go into this a good deal more about the way a lot of physicists understand what God or source or almighty or creator of the universe, whatever that is, about how that works. Very fundamental to our understanding of the quantum universe is that if we try to understand what matter is doing at its most minute level, that is, at the level of protons and electrons in atoms or even quarks, we find that we can never make measurements precise enough to be able to predict exactly what they will do. We will never be able to make a computer that can measure the position of everything in the universe and predict the future evolution of the universe. There would be no free will in such a universe, and there is no free will, and there would be no God in such a universe, and there is apparently some guiding intelligence or spirit or direction in this universe, and that enters our universe and our physics formalism in the Heisenberg uncertainty principle that says you can never, at a fundamental level, make measurements and predictions fine enough to predict everything. That's then intimate in this picture of the universe, and it explains fundamentally how God interacts in the universe with human free will in a description that I will show now. This is intended to be a kind of an overall logic diagram of how we as humans and God as a guiding spirit interact in our universe. A tall order, and along the way, we're going to have to talk a little bit about what human consciousness is. So, at the outset, I'm going to address this screen on this side. Sorry about that, folks. Maybe to be democratic, I'll move to the other, but this one is easier for me to see. I want to first start out here as the human being, and the human being has a brain with a left and a right side and the spinal cord antenna. And we have always known from experiments putting that helmet over people's head and studying brain waves that there seems to be a left side activity in the brain that's involved with inputs to the brain of information about external world. Your visual response, your audio response, your olfactory senses, your feeling of touch and pinch and so on, come to the left side where it's processed by the brain as feelings or information about what's happening to me as a sentient being. The right side of the brain has always been understood to be the artistic side, the soul side of us as an individual, the side where I interact with my entire history of being. It's where my human activity passes through as quantum holograms, information qubits, through a wormhole that defines my quantum existence and that makes me connected with my soul being, which is somehow close to God's source. And this contains the entire stored memory of my life, my friends, my history of activities in my past, and contains the record of my likes and dislikes. And this is what opens up at my time of birth, and at time of death, people record their experience in near-death experiences of their consciousness passing through this wormhole, reviewing their life of experiences, places, faces, events, and that all seems to be stored through this wormhole into my soul being, which represents all that I am, my past lives, my likes and dislikes. And the act of human consciousness, it goes on in the brain in doing the comparison between the left and the right part. That means I am actually comparing these inputs as sight and sound with my right side, where I make judgments about like or don't like, and the output of that goes through my spinal column to amplify the quantum holograms of this experience or not. And the way that this does it is in a kind of interesting computer model, and I'm going to have to wave both hands to do this for you. The fundamental property that does this is a kind of a computer model. I have to check on how I'm going. Yes. Not many of you, I suspect, really knows what's going on in your computer. And I don't mean you have to log in and give your password. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what's really going on with the ones and zeros in there. And I happen to know, because I built a computer in 1966 out of a pile of transistors. There was a computer to control a telescope instrument, and I actually know what goes on in there. And the basic fundamental operation of the computer works like this, and it's important that you understand it because it's what the mind does, as I will now describe. The basic heartbeat of the computer is the computer clock. And the clock goes along with a regular beat. In my first computer, that was at 10 megahertz, or 10 operations per second. Your computer now does it at 2 gigahertz, or 2 billion operations per second. And it goes clock, 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 beat, 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 beat. And with each beat, it's doing a certain arithmetic calculation that consists of the following steps. First, in a typical arithmetic calculation, 2 numbers, according to 1 beat, are shifted in, and then the logical operation is done. The logical operation may be add the 2 numbers together, or compare, is one bigger than the other, whatever. The logical operation is done with ones and zeros, and the result of that, either as the sum or maybe A is bigger than B, goes out to an output shift register. That's 1 beat of the clock. And then, as I say, the clock just keeps doing that beat, 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 compute, 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 compute. That's what the computer does at the guts level. What does your brain do? Same thing. The brain is taking the inputs in from the left side of the head. I told you, remember, that comes from your conscious being, feeling, sight, olfactory sense. All of that comes into the computer. That's the input shift register, and then that gets compared with your wormhole access to soul, your entire past, your learned experiences, and the brain at this 16 hertz or 16 cycles per second is doing compare, 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 compare. That's your conscious activity. In these comparisons, you say to yourself, I like, so output register goes to wormhole, amplifies the quantum information hologram of I like. That goes back in your wormhole and back to your source. Or it says, I don't like, that's not the way the world works, or she never said that, or whatever you may have stored as information. That gets not amplified and maybe negatively amplified, which would mean a quantum hologram with negative polarity gets sent out in that case. That appears to be what human consciousness is, and that's how your mind is doing the same thing as a clock. And it's all driven by information theory. Can you see that now? How it's all working on this information field of dark energy. It's comparing inputs coming from the outside to your internal being, your whole life of experiences, and in that mind, you're comparing as like or dislike or believe or disbelieve, and retransmitting for others to pick up perhaps as telepathic communications, or however that works. Information is interacting with your personal being through your wormhole to your soul being. Is this sounding more like a sermon, a science lecture? You know, at some point, science is going to have to come along and understand what the human body is doing, what is the sex act, what is like and dislike in the universe. We're going to have to come to terms with that sometime, and it's amazing how the discovery of dark energy, dark matter in the universe, existence of wormholes, now are making us understand how all of that works. A phenomenal time in the history of science. Now, I want to go on a little bit and tell you some very fascinating things about black holes. And this is a very personal chapter in the story because I have been studying black holes for many years now. I'm studying the ones of the kind that are at the centers of quasars, these supergiant monsters that have as much mass as the rest of our galaxy. That is, 1 billion stars. These monsters live at the center of all galaxies. The one in our galaxy is puny. It has only about 10 million stars. So it's not really that dramatic. But other galaxies that we observe in the universe, the biggest ones have about, 3 billion mass, is I think the record holder. And it has long been recognized by the theory of, that Stephen Hawking and others have promulgated, that these things must be very mysterious. They contain some internal structure that we can never know about because in that old theory, prejudicial there, old theory, there was an event horizon, and information can never cross across that event horizon, and so we can never know what's in that realm inside the black hole. Now, there was always the following contradiction in that theory of black holes. The contradiction that, as you all know, matter always falls into the black hole and can't get out again. Even light can't get out again. And yet, how many of you have thought to ask, well, if that's the case, why do they happen to be the most luminous objects in the universe? There is a reason, and I want to talk to you about that now, because you, with your tax dollars, have supported this magnificent suite of spacecraft now orbiting the Earth. The Hubble Space Telescope takes visual photographs and ultraviolet photographs. The Chandra X-ray Observatory looks at X-rays. The Spitzer spacecraft looks at infrared. The Swift spacecraft looks at gamma rays. All of these are now helping us look at these astronomical objects. I have used ground-based telescopes for the last 20 years to look at these quasar objects dominated by this black hole objects. And this is an artist simulation of what apparently is there. And what's most excitingly new and interesting about them is that, of course, the actual black hole object is right here at the center, and it's actually about the size of my laser pointer spot. It is still very, very small. But there's something very new that's come up about this, and that has to do with the role of magnetic fields. Because the theory of black holes was developed in the 50s and 60s era. And at that time, our modern theory of quantum electrodynamics was not as well formulated as it was today. And a lot of ideas about the role of magnetic fields were incorrectly formulated 50 years ago. So although the basic idea of black hole is probably correct, the role of the magnetic field was not correctly understood. And today, our observations, including my own, which actually for the first time combining gravitational lensing and microlensing with an understanding of what has to be the dynamics combined with optical observations now have shown that the object works as follows. Once again, we have this tiny black hole object at the center, and contained by that black hole and rotating with it is a magnetic field, actually kind of looking in space like an armature of a motor. It contains magnetic fields. It's a little bit like a rotating bar magnet, with magnetic fields having a north pole curling around and coming back to the south pole. And that's rotating around and attached to the black hole. That's a new understanding of this object. And the object is today called not a black hole, but a MECO. Maybe you saw that word, MECO, meaning magnetic, eternally collapsing object. That's what's at the center of quasars. Now, that magnetic field, I've just barely shown it with a few little lines here. I don't know if you can see that at the back of the room. Those magnetic field lines are circulating through, acting as a rotating magnet, and they sweep out in what's called a magnetic propeller action, the entire central region of this object, which is why you have that dark central region. The few central percent of the screen, that's a dark region here around the central object. You might call it a black hole. I call it a modified black hole, that we call a MECO. There's this dark region immediately surrounding it, but then there's the interaction region where those magnetic fields touch the inside of this accretion disk object. And this accretion disk object represents where the universe tries to bring junk from the universe down on top of this thing. The chances are it will do a near miss and not fall directly into the black hole, but hit something around it, and eventually that makes a giant swirl. It's called an accretion disk, and that's where the energy or the matter ultimately collects. Because of the intense gravitational magnetic field of the central MECO object, the matter tries to pull into the center, but it's in Keplerian rotation around it. It's doing a complicated dynamics, and as it tries to fall in, the magnetic field is trying to push it out, and in the balance of all of that is the existence of outflows, which were discovered actually 30 and 40 years ago. It's because they consist of a dark ring here at the center that's kind of stationary and always about there and being held off by the central magnetic field. And then I've tried to draw here outflows on the outer parts. Can you see how that there's matter flowing away from the center? That had been seen, and you can imagine it's almost like there's a top side of this where matter is flowing out on the top side, and again, there's matter flowing out on the bottom side. That is the apparent structure of the black hole, and that's established with our suite of spacecraft with a 25-year history of brightness fluctuations, of quasars, what we've learned from gravitational lensing and gravitational microlensing. This theory I've just told you about puts all of that together, and I've been submitting papers to the Astronomical Journal about that with colleagues Darrell Leiter, Stanley Robinson at other universities, and this is university-level research. It's a substantially different picture of what black holes are. Now, of course, I'm telling you this in the context of this discussion for a very good reason. I think you all know, both intuitively and things that you would have read, that the central idea of black holes is that they push physics to the limit. All physics. That means extreme gravitational field, extreme relativistic effects, extreme quantum electrodynamics, condensed matter theory, emergent physics from apparent randomness going on in all of this extreme physics, extremes of density and temperature. Physics pushed to the limits in every way here. Matter condensing because it's in trouble. It has to go to the limits that nature will allow, and so we're dealing with extreme physics. Now, it's also essentially true in this context that there is a point in such an object where you have a place where you can't anymore know what's inside. We understand and believe that there could be a whole other space-time continuum in there, and it's my belief that this theory works best if you simply say that's where God is. That's where whatever it is that's driving our universe and in any way interacting with our free will coming from the outside, where all of that comes together. So I'd like to focus on that event horizon region for just a moment. The older idea is that this is an event horizon, and that matter falling to the event horizon would cross that event horizon and go and disappear and be in another universe from which no other signal could escape. But this MICO object that I'm telling you about now, that we've discovered from actual astronomical observations, now possible for the first time, has a significantly different property, and it's very cute, so listen for just a moment. At the supposed event horizon, matter is trying to fall down, but there's this problem of time dilation. The closer you get to that surface, the more of a problem matter has moving because of time dilation. What happens is you can imagine that in a finite amount of time, say 1,000 years, matter can get half as close to this mysterious place. And to get half as close again will take 100,000 years. And to get half as close again will take 10 million years. And half as close again, 1 billion years. And as in Zeno's paradox, it really can never get there. As it tries to move in, it builds up to higher densities, to extremes of quantum electrodynamics, to extreme of emergent field properties, extremes of solid condensed matter physics. Now remember that light can't really escape this region anymore, except in very, very long lifetimes. But information moves faster than light, so information can explore these inner regions. And when you think about it, the condensed matter physics of this situation means that this is a place in the universe where quantum holograms are stored. This is literally nature's hard drive. All the information of what I'm saying and your secret thoughts about me are all going to the universe as information qubits, quantum holograms, being stored at this place and trying to get into the center by the gravitational effects, but blocked effectively by relativistic effects. Now, it's easiest for me to imagine that how the universe works, and what I tried to describe on a previous drawing is that what's inside, and could I have the screen back again? Thank you. That what's inside of this MICO object, formerly black hole, so remember, it's surrounded by nature's hard drive, and I'm about to tell you that nature's divine purpose interacts with our universe at this interface. It's easiest for me to imagine, since we can't interact with what's inside of this directly. In other words, we couldn't send a laser beam in here. Can't do that. We can't send a beam into that center, and therefore that would logically be where whatever divine force, whatever almighty is directing the universe is resident in this one and is probably connected in some wormhole way to all the other black holes in the universe. They probably have some interior space here that's all connected together through wormholes. And that's why some people describe in near-death experience, where they've come to the presence of their creator. You remember the near-death experience. You stand in the presence of your creator, and ultimately you're told that you have to go back and wake up again on the operating table. But some people have said, but I want to know about how the universe works. And sometimes this divine figure has said, okay, and takes them on what they describe as a journey through the black hole, where they describe the experience of being all places in the universe at the same time. How could that be? It suggests to me, as I've told you a moment ago, that this inner space inside of the black hole is probably the space of all black holes in the universe, and therefore all over the universe at the same time. Now, staying with that picture for just a moment, listen carefully to what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that these quantum effects, these effects that we can't predict in any computer and that probably reveal the workings of the divine creator, those are bleeding out from the center of the black hole toward this surface, which I call nature's hard drive. And that's why I write up here, divine purpose is appearing here in our universe just outside this event horizon structure. There, this divine purpose is combining with our intent and our free will in some kind of quantum mechanical soup that no computer of man can understand, and that's somehow being resolved, and what gets retransmitted then back into our universe and into our minds is some combination of those two, divine purpose and human intent. And when we go to church and pray, or we have communal experiences, what that represents is our telepathically with one another in church, enhancing and magnifying that quantum hologram of our intent and wishes. That gets transmitted to the black hole, where it meets the intent of the divine creator, the Almighty. I have 9 minutes left, and that's just the perfect timing. I want to now turn this subject, now that you've softened up, now that you've understood all of this, this is what it takes to understand spacecraft, UFOs. I didn't do this as an idle exercise. I didn't do this for self-aggrandizement. I want you to understand now where UFOs fit into this picture. And now, can we adjust the illumination of this? Can you all see this reasonably well? This is my best effort at describing a spacecraft. I don't photograph them like you guys do. If it could be a little bit darker, that would help. But there's not that much here. It's just intended to show you that inside of the envelope of the spacecraft are three key components I want to talk about. One is the operators seen in their console, and that's here. Can you see the three operators? They sit around a central console, and they're set up so this is kind of a conical-shaped thing, a truncated cone, with the operators having their heads rather close together and their spinal columns arrayed in such a way that jointly they have maximum contact with our three dimensions of space. I mean, the way this is arranged, you have spinal column transmitter antenna contact with up, down, left, right, and in, out, the three dimensions. That's why they're in this arrangement. The power supply for this thing is this plasma, and it's been described as having element 115, not yet synthesized on Earth, but we're up to element 111 in experimental labs. But anyway, this is a plasma of element 115 in which helium atoms are introduced, and it's been described that this creates a kind of a popping, pop, 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 in the plasma. What does that represent? That's the power supply. It creates quantum uncertainty, quantum noise. That popping just creates a very unfocused random field, which now the telepathically shared communication of the operators can guide and focus by their intent. It can make something out of this popping noise thing. That's what the operation is. The information field that's generated this way by the power supply now gets picked up by the lower part of the spacecraft as a giant crystal, which takes this energy, focuses it, and projects it out the bottom. When the spacecraft comes to visit Earth in the year 2007, the operators merely intend that that should happen. The spacecraft is defined or described as being semi-sentient, meaning it also is in kind of telepathic compensation through this plasma drive. And by the way, one abductee who passed underneath the spacecraft on the way to being guided in said looking up into the bottom of it was like looking into a volcano. That's the plasma she saw. So when it's their intent that their spacecraft should appear here, the plasma sends the information or combines the information of the spacecraft and its operators and their intent to be here with the crystal. It opens the wormhole, brings the spacecraft to our space-time continuum. And notice that in this transport mechanism, we don't go atom by atom, molecule by molecule. Just the information of the spacecraft and its contents passes through the universe in this giant wormhole. That's how the transformation apparently works. There must be more control of anti-gravity for them to stand in space. I don't understand how that works. That's another part of a discussion, and maybe some of you will describe that to me. But anyway, this is, in my view, the amazing spacecraft technology. Can you see how it's information-driven? Can you see it's based on wormholes? And can you see how that you have to understand the fact that there's twice as much dark energy in the universe, meaning information field, as there is solid matter today? Are you aware of that? If you look at the overall mass of the universe today, it's a fact that there's twice as much of this negative gravity, dark energy, information field, all the same thing, as there is attractive gravity. That's where we stand in the universe. And in my last 4 minutes, I'd like to then just describe to you something that's really amazing about this. It's enough to give you religion. And especially a scientist. And by the way, the picture that I gave you of the quantum level and the way God works and appears in our universe as quantum effects, I've described that at the Ozark Symposium last year and the Laughlin Symposium the year before. And if you want to hear more about that more specifically, you can get those tapes, those DVDs. I did the short version this trip because we are always on limited time. What I want to say now is that when you think about it, going back to this slide that I showed near the beginning of the talk about the inflation of the universe and our having come to a time in the universe where we're in uncontrolled expansion, suggests the amazing operation of a finely tuned universe, which was set into motion, where all of the constants of the velocity of light and the fine structure constant and all those little detailed constants, and in a physics text you'll read there are a dozen or so constants that appear in our universe with no good explanation of them. They seem to have put in the universe in such a way as to allow the existence of this population of black holes that were built into the universe from the very beginning. The universe was built from the very beginning in an expanding format with galaxies emerging, with their black holes in their centers, and all of this being set just right so that stars would emerge, planets would emerge with the stars, life would emerge, we would have a water-based life system. And now that we are long evolved on this progression, I told you we're about 2/3 of the way through on this view graph, but it just keeps going off onto your right. The universe is now making an entire additional population of star remnant black holes. These are much less massive than the ones at the centers of galaxies. I told you those are mega star mass things. They contain 1 million or 1 billion times the mass of a sun. These new ones are only puny 10 or 12 solar mass black holes. But they result from the end of all star life for massive stars, and therefore the universe is filling up with this new kind of black hole, which creates more of this information field energy. Can you see in this description how the universe was finely tuned to start out with big black holes that assist the expansion and assist the development of life, and now is going to an information-dominated universe where the mass content is minor, where the black holes at the center of galaxies are no longer dominant, and we now have a universe that's full of and filling and becoming increasingly dominated by the energy, the dark energy of sentience and information. Astonishing. And doesn't that make you really wonder, did that really just happen by accident? Or is there some guiding principle that did this? I don't know that we want to introduce that buzzword, what is it, intelligent design, but there it is. The universe seems to have been created by an intelligent design for the further glorification of its creator in sentience of the universe. Thank you all.
All right, we're going to take